Hearts is one of the best series I've ever played. It even completely outshines the LEGO series and Pokemon franchise in my eyes, both of which I grew up with and still play to this day. It's been around for 17 years at this point and has changed and grown through each new title, that every game appeals to a variety of people. Maybe you like vagueness, perhaps you like being told where to go at every possible instance of the story. You could like being sad as all hell for the entirety of the whole game, or you just might like watching the hammiest fanfiction ever play out. I kinda wanna look at how the series has shifted over these long years, and see how the storytelling techniques as well as the world design have modified and developed with each new installment. So join me, won't you, as we look over the legacy of Kingdom Hearts. Did you know that Sora's original design was this weird humanoid lion boy thing? That sounds about right, as the entire premise of Kingdom Hearts sounds like somebody's odd crossover fanfiction, which is a good thing, because the original Kingdom Hearts is, at least in my mind, the avatar of video games. It has a really wacky cast of characters that are all thrust together in a similar goal and have to save the world with a combination of mystic elements and beating the shit out of people with some sort of blunt instrument. It's just a fun time all around. I'm honestly going to avoid talking about the gameplay and focus on how Kingdom Hearts has evolved as a story. Honestly, the combat has been talked about to death. It's hit X to win and then sometimes cure, but can you really blame people for saying that? It's an early PS2 game. Expecting a well-defined combat system out of this game is your mistake, so we move away from the bare bones hack and slash to the meat of this game. And let's get this out of the way right now. The original Kingdom Hearts is a slow and methodical mess. The story, overall, is pretty straightforward in this title, simply due to it being the first in the series. Because of the tonal, character, and basic premise confusion, Square felt as if they couldn't really do much. So they opted to have Sora go through multiple Disney worlds that honestly connect to the main plot very little. Yes, you have to go find and seal the keyhole, but that's pretty tenuous, seeing as you just kind of stumble around aimlessly in every world besides Agrabah, which just takes you there as part of Jafar's plan. The actual story amounts to little more than haphazardly walking around, fighting some Heartless, and then going back to talk to an NPC, then a boss, sometimes two, and then the keyhole is just presented to you. Then you move on, which for an early PS2 game is fine. It's much better than some other titles we were getting at the same time, but by today's standards it seems pretty flimsy. For instance, what's the point of Halloween Town in this game? Like, yeah, the movie was popular at the time, and still is, but outside of us killing Oogie Boogie, what did we accomplish? Neither Maleficent or Riku are even near this world, and we just kinda pop in, rip Oogie's sack, and then bounce. So I'm a little lost on what the point was. I mean, Atlantica has the same issue, but at the same time, the world has a new way of moving and fighting, as well as the whole underwater theme working for it. And when I say that, I mean that the level design is much more vertically stacked than the rest of the game, seeing as you have complete mobility on the y-axis, rather than being limited by your jump and glide like in the rest of the game, thus making it stand out from the rest of the game by its mere existence. However, Ursula really doesn't have a goal outside of taking over the ocean. So again, what was the end result here? Neither world has a Princess of Light, nor do they have any connection to the main plot. On the other hand, they do have unique looks for Sora, Donald, and Goofy, and the Keyblades you get from these worlds are pretty impressive for what they're meant to specialize in. And if you're looking for a spooky or wet time, these places have you covered. Even in spite of the pointlessness I listed before, here's a quick question for you. Do you know why these worlds aren't deemed wholly pointless by anyone who gives it half a thought? Well, I mean, I like both of them, though I don't think Atlantica is bad, so what? But anyway, it's because of the emotional attachment we have to both Sora and their respective movie character. The game has great emotion for every world you visit, but the execution is a bit flawed. It seems a tad disjointed, like nothing really connects to each other until you get to Hollow Bastion, or Neverland if you really want to stretch the definition of connecting. That being said, the simple fact of how the game is presented is masterful. Let me put a scenario in your head. If you were about 6 to 10 years old when the game was first released and all you had to go on was the Disney characters on the box to gravitate towards, would this game be any less enjoyable? The answer is no, because unlike later games in the series that make it so that you have to play the prior ones, this game had no such ties, thus making it easier to understand. And even if you haven't seen every movie in the game, you've at least heard of them or of Disney in general. That is where this game shines the brightest in its story structure. The strange thing is, it's also the weakest in terms of how it's literally structured, but we've already covered that. Getting to take place and actively participate in your favorite Disney movies, not only helping out, but being assisted by the main characters of those stories, and getting to kill Clayton or Captain Hook, that's amazing. It's the biggest selling point that Kingdom Hearts 1 ever had, and one of the reasons people love it and don't really talk bad about it if they grew up with it. And can you guess why? It's because the concept alone is something that hides all the problems I listed before, and it even made up for the game's lack of direction. This game is infamous for how it sort of tells you where you need to go one time, if that, then never telling you again, which is frustrating, no doubt, but it holds a little bit of a side benefit. This, in my mind, is meant to be sort of an exploration tool. It lets you go to areas of the game with little restriction in many of the worlds, allowing you to wander through your favorite Disney movies to find items, enemies, all the Trinity circles, or even bonus bosses if you're late enough in the game. I was particularly fond of those Trinity circles because it was a mechanical representation of how Sora, Donald, and Goofy had grown as friends over the course of the game, starting with a simple jump and gradually progressing to putting their weapons together to show camaraderie. Little things like that make this game worth exploring. The problem is that if you don't want to go through this game exploring every corner, it becomes infuriating. So what's the better payoff, exploration or directness? Obviously, I prefer the latter, but it does depend on who you are with this choice, on seeing if this issue or other issues are even issues to begin with. To me, the original Kingdom Hearts hid a lot of its glitches behind its concept, making a stable franchise in the process and selling massively well on the PS2. Despite its faults, Kingdom Hearts 1 had made a game so intriguing and so out there that people wanted more, and Square succeeded in their goal of bringing people into this cacophony of weird, thus paving the smoothest road possible for potential sequels. With how successful Kingdom Hearts was, a spin-off for the Game Boy made some semblance of sense. It's just a pity Square didn't think so. Chain of Memories was not a spin-off, it was a direct sequel to Kingdom Hearts, and Kingdom Hearts 2 started where Chain of Memories ended, which means if you were someone like me who liked the story and wanted to keep track of it, this is where the troubles began. Due to the fact that Chain of Memories and Recoded have the same issues, I'm just gonna lump them here together to keep from repeating myself more so than I already will, seeing as they were both on handhelds and most people didn't really see the point in playing games they thought were spin-offs. They got the same treatment there, and now they're getting it again here. I'll knock out Recoded first because it's the simpler of the two to talk about. Recoded was a mobile puzzle game that was eventually remastered for the Nintendo DS, and it doesn't really tie into anything in the main plot, so it's just kind of boring. The only real story structure it serves at all is that Pete and Maleficent get stuck in the datascape, and even in the game they reappear in, they don't even give it more than a passing mention. So nothing gained, nothing lost. I mean, now with the Big Hero 6 trailer finally released, we learned that Journal Riku is using the bug blocks to take over San Francisco. But I bet you everything, Goofy and Donald will explain this to the real Sora, since the Sora from Recoded is made from the journal like Data Riku is. So again, nothing gained and nothing lost. Aside from Kingdom Hearts 3, the only reason I can see this game even possibly making any kind of sense from a setup point of view, aside from what I just mentioned, comes from the end of Birth by Sleep, when Ansem the Wise tells Aqua about the data he collected from Sora, but that can also tie into 358 over 2 days, but we'll get to those later. Combat-wise, there's nothing to write home about. It's got the same setup as Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance, that being the command deck with attacks and items lumped together, rather than being separate like they were in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, but now with even less variation, seeing as Recoded was based on Kingdom Hearts 1, and thus had to make its commands from that game. Structure-wise, it's got a lot of issues in this collection as well, seeing as it's just the cutscenes strung together with random text blurbs to explain the in-game dialogue and gameplay we don't get to play through, which is admirable that they added that. But still, it's a bit jarring to go from a cinematic to a slow, and I do mean slow, moving text scroll that sums up what could have been interesting to see is a little more annoying in my mind. Recoded is honestly one of the biggest step backwards in the franchise because, just like Chain of Memories, it's a game that is stuck in the shadow of the first title and can't get out of it. I think if they wanted to help with the whole diving into the journal thing that is this game's paper-thin plot, then my solution would have been have the real Sora go into the journal and have Data Sora be a party member. That way we get the same plot, but with our Sora providing snark and a little bit of nostalgia that would have made this journey a little more enjoyable. Cody tried to add something in that tied into Chain of Memories, that being this weird-ass secondary ending about Roxas for some reason, but it seemed like more of a stretch than that weird nobody boss fight in the start of Kingdom Hearts 2. So really, what was even the point? Funny enough, I feel the same way about Chain of Memories. It adds almost nothing to the overall story, and it really is just Sora fighting with a Riku clone or yelling at / fighting Organization 13 members for reasons? Yeah, that's the thing. This game's story is so vague that Square added things to later titles that justify this one existing, but seeing as the game came out a literal decade before those games were even conceived of, this game comes off a tad lacking in what it's talking about. The inherent flaw in this title is that it's utterly skippable. Every other game in the series explains what's going on in this game for it, as I said, to justify its mere existence. Who are Organization 13? That's in Kingdom Hearts 2 and 358. Why are they in Castle Oblivion? That's in Birth by Sleep. Why do they want Sora's tasty gams? That's in Dream Drop Distance. Kinda. The only reason to even care about this game is the ending. Not that it's good or really interesting, but because the ending of Sora's story, and in the remasters Riku / Mickey's as well, tells you why they were doing what they were doing at the start of Kingdom Hearts 2. And to save you lovely people some time, I'm going to sum up the endings. And go. Sora's memories got messed with and now have to be put back together, and thus he won't remember anyone in or about Castle Oblivion, and in order to do this, they stick him in a Luke Skywalker egg. Riku and Mickey are in Organization 13 codes to avoid being noticed by the organization itself. No, I'm not kidding, that's the real reason they give you. The reason they won't be noticed in these codes is because they mask the smell of darkness, which has a smell now. No, I'm not kidding, that's actually a plot point in Riku's half of the game. Other than that, it's simply boring to get through because this and Recoded are just rehashes of the first game with barely a new overarching story spread over it like a crumb coat. You visit the same worlds and do the same things as the first game. Side note about Chain of Memories in general, that comes from the 1.5 plus 2.5 remake. That is, in all honesty, hilarious due to how much shade is thrown at Chain of Memories. If you look at the back cover of the game, each title has something kind of cool to go along with it. The first has something to do with beginnings, the second had to do with continuation, Birth by Sleep has it just say something about destiny, and Days / Recoded are both just HD cutscenes. But for Chain of Memories, it just says card-based battle system, because that's all this has going for it. When I first read this, I laughed for a solid 3 minutes because of how much pointlessness this game is, to the point that even Nomura is aware of it. Speaking of which, while I'm here, I'm gonna restate this, because I think it's something that needs to be said. I was initially not going to say this because everyone and their mom has brought this up, and it's starting to sound like the explosions in a Michael Bay movie. But fuck it, I'm gonna throw my 2 cents into the pile. The game was released on the Game Boy Advance and had the hardware of a baked potato. Due to this limitation, Square turned the game into a real-time action game of War. War being a card game where you play a card, your opponent plays a card, and the highest card wins, which is fine until you get the hang of slights. Slights were, essentially, really powerful attacks that cost 3 cards to use and make a better attack that can't be blocked by anything except for a 0 card. These could be bypassed if you didn't know how useful they were or don't think about them until the fight ends. Unless you don't pay attention to the tutorial or your level up menu, you can't avoid these attacks, and therefore you'll be able to clip note through the entire game, especially when you learn Sonic Blade. I mean, just look at this thing. It kills all the things all the time. So the game goes from being a fun thinking person's hack and slash to a brainless button masher that you can ignore the story in up until the end. So unless you have literally nothing else to do, Chain of Memories is a waste of time to play, and Coded is an utter waste of time to watch. Kingdom Hearts 2 is believed by many, myself included, to be the best of the series. It has tight gameplay, fun set pieces, and adds a whole new meaning to the term drive. However, as with any Kingdom Hearts game, there is a big, huge, gaping problem the size of a black hole with this game, and that's the opening. Don't get me wrong, I think this game is a treat, but the game's tutorial is between 4 to 5 hours long, and you're being thrown into a character who we as the player have never met, and are just expected to accept this and take our lumps without batting an eye. It's still fun, and Roxas is one of my favorite characters in the series, but the way he's introduced and how he's shoved down your throat like a beer funnel, combined with Roxas's attitude here, is a bit frustrating at best, and a waste of time at worst. I mean, not to belabor the point about how dumb this introduction is. Oh, who am I kidding? I'm gonna belabor this point to all hell, but god damn it, is it just stupid? Like, it sets up where Sora is and how he gets out of the pod he was put in Chain of Memories, but at the same time, I can't think of any reason why it makes you play through 6 days of content just to get to a point you could have gotten through in 1 day. Like, 5 hours in 1 day would have made this feel a lot weightier, but as it's presented, it just falls flat on its face. For example, rather than having every day reset as the glitches keep happening, have the gang reset at the usual spot, and we slowly build up Roxas's frustration, and have the pre-climax of the tutorial be the struggle festival, then we go to the old house on the hill, have Axel be flattered, join with Sora, and then start the adventure, rather than dragging that out over the course of 7 days. But regardless, 4 to 5 hours of a game that can take you up to 30 hours to get through the story isn't the worst. It could be like a Persona game that just holds your hand for 10 hours rather than half that time. Anywho, after the tedium that is Digital Twilight Town and what is a pretty awesome fight as Roxas against Axel, we get Sora again. Afterward, we do a similar formula to the first game, go to a world, find a Disney character, help them, kill a boss, and leave. The difference comes in the structure. This game has much more integrated stories. You go there for a similar reason to the first game, that being to find Riku, Mickey, and Kairi, but at the same time it has the organization or Maleficent and Pete thrown in to give the stories a unique twist. For example, in Kingdom Hearts 1 you go to Olympus Coliseum and it's just a tournament battleground, but in Kingdom Hearts 2 it's... well, that. But now we have a story with some guy named Auron and a semi-fight with Demyx. Hell, the entire plot of the first Pirates of the Caribbean is kept intact, but the return visit is retconned by Luxord because of reasons. I don't know and I don't care. Why? Because the boss fights and overall concept of this portion of the game is so satisfying it doesn't need an explanation. Most of the worlds in the game are pretty fun to be in. I even like Atlantica. And before you guys lose your damn minds, I have a reason for this. I like rhythm games, and rather than us playing through The Little Mermaid again, we get a few button press song sequences that combined take about 5 minutes apiece, and there's like 5 songs. So if you do the math, that's less than half an hour of your time. And even if you go back to do them again to get 100% of the journal complete, it's faster because you know what you're doing. So get over it. The meme was never funny. The worlds overall are well crafted and made with the movie itself in mind. I mean, have you seen Beast's Castle? It's so good. One thing I can say with confidence difference is that the worlds in the first game were rather small, and I get the feeling that they picked worlds that only had 2 to 3 areas to work with, and they just had to make up the rest. I mean, look at Wonderland. Outside of the quote-unquote courtyard, the room with the doorknob, and the Mad Hatter tea table, nothing really is from the film. They just added the connecting rooms that make it a bit bigger. Also, why is it a fucking box? Halloween Town really highlights this difference in attention to detail. The town square is really tiny in both games, but the Spiral Hill is much better placed in Kingdom Hearts 2, as well as having Christmas Land in the game at all. This game has every area of the world you visit be more recognizable than in the first game. Rather than asking exactly where you are, you get to go, oh, I love this part of the castle, movie, land I'm visiting. And it's nice. Speaking of the Disney worlds and overall design of the game as a whole, I want to bring up a contrast between the villains of this game and Kingdom Hearts 1. One common aspect I hear a lot from people is that they love the evil council of Disney villains being evil for the sake of evilness in the first game because they were actively trying to get Sora because he had the Keyblade evil. Outside of Traverse Town, Destiny Island, Wonderland, and Deep Jungle, each world you visit is home to a villain on the council and therefore makes you care if they're defeated, whereas the organization is just kind of boring and not all that involved in the main plot of the game. The only character less involved in this game's main setup is Maleficent, seeing as she and Pete fall off the face of the game after about halfway through. However, that common argument disregards this fundamental aspect of the story. The organization and its members aren't trying to stop Sora until he's made aware of their plans in the raid on Hollow Bastion. This is because him destroying Heartless benefits them, unlike with the Council, seeing as they saw the Heartless as minions and not just heart fodder. Why stop the one person helping you get the thing you want? Answer, you wouldn't. Another thing is that while the organization may not be perfect, they are at least organized. Better than the council ever was. Let's take the leaders of each group for instance. What did they want? Yes, they both wanted Kingdom Hearts, but for different reasons. Xemnas and the others want to be whole again and need hearts to do so, whereas Maleficent wanted to... what? Burn all the worlds to the ground? Seriously, what was her end goal here? The council are also really bad at communication, seeing as no one knows what Maleficent's plan is and are constantly denying help from one another and actively fucking up their goals by not asking questions until it's too late. Hell, this game's Halloween Town proves this point for me.
Oh, clumsy oaf!
Are you still here? Why don't you oogie on back where you came from? You're cramping my style!
Have you already forgotten who brought you back, you insolent bag of bugs?
Sorry, can't remember a thing.
Very well, you ingrate. You'll rue the day you spurned my help!
Say what you will about the organization, but at least Xemnas had enough foresight to tell his colleagues what the plan was and why. And yes, while he is the leader, the other 12 of them can chime in and give counter-arguments. And we sense that, and thus, it makes us care about each member because they have their own goals and ideals while still being in complete line of the organization's goal. The interesting thing is that it fits the timeline of the games. In Chain of Memories, they were literally in the middle of a coup, and in Kingdom Hearts 2, they've had a whole year to get better acquainted and reform the bonds that were destroyed in Chain of Memories, and that makes you care about them and what's going on and with who. Speaking of which, the emotion of this game is really well done too. It doesn't spend a lot of time being sad like how Kingdom Hearts 1 and Chain of Memories were at times. In fact, Sora is one of the happiest characters in this game, and he only really cries one time. He finds Riku and Kairi and is overwhelmed by it that he just cries for a bit. And it hits you, like, hard. Kingdom Hearts 1 had this issue where Sora himself was pretty mopey and mostly kind of whiny, and in Chain of Memories he's even worse, being angry and not all that fun to be around. I completely get why though. If I had my memories messed with, and being told to fight random people for no real reason would kind of piss me off too. But in Kingdom Hearts 2, his optimism works because it doesn't detract from the story. If anything, it adds to it. One of the many things people will say about this game is that it's too safe, and that it doesn't really try to shock you or even make you feel moments of anything. And those people are going to hell for lying to you and misinforming you about this series. To those of you who haven't seen or played it, I strongly urge you to do so, and have a box of tissues ready for at least 3 scenes. Kingdom Hearts 2 is often considered to be the best in the series, for good reason. And can you blame people who say that? It's kind of hard to follow up an A+ paper with anything, and it not seem, well, outclassed, you might say. already made a video about this game on its own. It's about Axel and Roxas' relationship, so I won't cover that aspect much here. Thus, this section will be slightly shorter than the others because of that reason. However, the overall importance of this story is needed to be addressed. The game takes place in that year that Sora was in his coma, and we get to see who Roxas is and get a much clearer image of who Axel is. And the fact that it's one of the cutest gay, but not gay, but also so not gay that it shoots the moon right back into being gay again, stories ever written is fun to see unfold. However, the biggest issue I have with this story is Xion. And the problem I have is, well, what was the point of her? She's said to be Sora's memories of Kairi, but that's what Naminé was said to be in Chain of Memories. But then she gets retconned into being Kairi's nobody, which doesn't seem to add up considering she never became a Heartless, and her heart was in Sora in Kingdom Hearts 1. So even that idea gets thrown out the window. That or Xion ties into the whole being data from Sora thing I touched on earlier from Recoded. Either way, Xion is an all-around forgettable character. She leaves so little impression on the player that Square had her flat out killed off and erased from everybody's memories at the end. In fact, the game itself got the same treatment because, much like with Recoded, this game got cut into a 3-hour series of cutscenes to keep the story intact. And if I'm being fair, it's an alright movie. It's not gonna win any awards, but it's alright. Everyone sounds great and, you know, is trying to emote most of the time, except for Xion. She never seems like she wants to be there. Hell, Naminé had more personality in her voice than this whiny Linkin Park reject. So yeah, 358 is worth a watch, but from what I've played, it isn't actually the funnest to get through. Yeah, you had things like the Limit Break to shake things up, which functioned much like the abilities from the first two games. In Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, you had special abilities that cost mana to use that were way more powerful than standard combos and the combo ability add-ons you got from leveling up. The drawback was that these attacks took up 2 or 3 mana bars to use, and unless you were in a mob fight, you really didn't want to use these since you needed mana to heal or to use Barrier's beta form. When you were brought to critical health, you could use these really powerful fuck you attacks, but that's one element of the game, and it's not the funnest thing in the world to nearly die, to maybe try and come back from it, might I add. It reminds me a lot of 2D fighting games, not so much the Limit Break itself, but in how this one element is like a finisher after sustaining enough damage. The difference is that in a 2D fighting game, there is rarely a story, and if there is one, it's pretty minimal and easy to get through if you want to breeze through it. Typically, Kingdom Hearts has at least 12 hours of story content to get through per game, so this idea is a fun concept, but it's just a carrot on a stick for those of us who don't want to get to critical health just to deal a bit heavier of an attack, to only then get killed by a light breeze attack and have to start the fight over again. The game also has a much different approach from every other game in the series, that being the mission-based world system. Previously, and afterwards, every world was an open world that had stories that led you to each area organically as part of said story, and now you have to pick through each world's missions one at a time, and oh my god does it get repetitive fast. What's more is that nothing happens in between these missions. The only interesting stuff that happens is near the end of the game, when Xion is revealed to be Sora's memories of Kairi, and even then, it just seemed like it was made up on the spot. Other than the 2 Adora gays, and some behind the scenes stuff from Chain of Memories told to us by Axel, nothing of note really happens in this game. And just like with Recoded, the damn thing was turned into a cutscene salad with text croutons thrown in for variety, and damn it Square, why do you keep doing things like this? Are movies holding your children by the throat with a Keyblade? I mean, in some ways this is less noticeable than Recoded because it's not as important as it, and by that I mean it's still important, but at the same time everything else is explained in Kingdom Hearts 2 or Birth by Sleep, and the only new thing, that being Xion, is discarded so that we can keep the timeline intact. 358 over 2 days is in this weird middle ground of being the cutest gay rom-com / drama you'll ever see, but is also one of the most tedious in the series to get through from a gameplay perspective. So if you have the HD collection or can type words into a search bar, just get a bowl of popcorn and watch it, because otherwise you're gonna get bored of the repetition, stale missions, and frustrating combat system. But either way, you're gonna get tired of Kairi's dark Alola form. Can we go back to the fairy type variant? Please? Holy moping Batman! Kingdom Hearts just got smacked with depression. Birth by Sleep is caught in this odd place in terms of marketing and overall platforming problems. Let's get the biggest issue out of the way. Whereas Recoded, Chain of Memories, and 358 all came out on handheld systems rather than actual consoles, it was a good chance you already had those handheld systems, seeing as the game came out late in their respective handheld lifespan. Birth by Sleep, on the other hand, came out on the PSP. Fucking what? I mean, I can understand why to an extent, since it had the same processing system as the PlayStation, but the biggest issue is that the PSP isn't something that a lot of people had. So if you didn't have one, sucks to be you. They could have just made the damn thing for the PS3 and had a much better graphic system and overall just a smoother transition from the PS2. But no, they thought spreading out the installments was a much smarter idea. God kill me now. In any case, the story is a bit more of an interesting subject to bring up because it has 3 different perspectives and thus 3 different stories to tell you, which is admittedly a fun time when you think about it. The problem comes in when the game doesn't tell you in which order to play them or even why certain decisions were made the way they were. For instance, Ventus and Vanitas. These two are the oddest things in the game to me. Ventus is his own entity, but he's also the basis for Roxas. Like, I can't make this shit up. Roxas looks like Ven because Sora helped heal Ven's heart by giving Ven a piece of his own. This is also the reason Vanitas looks like Sora. Don't get me wrong, I love this idea and I think it's awesome, but at the same time it comes across as lazy. Like, yeah, it's fun to have parallels in your story, but at the same time, why don't you just make new character models and not have the story tie back into Sora, Kairi, and Riku for once? You remember what I said about the games that came out after Chain of Memories trying to make that game more important? This is essentially this game's whole function. The only reason Organization 13 is in Castle Oblivion is to find Ven and try to get Vanitas back to use him to get more hearts to fuel Kingdom Hearts. Other than that, it's simply a setup for more people to be in Kingdom Hearts 3. I mean, yeah, you have Terranort, who is half Xemnas, as well as Lingering Will, a secret super boss from the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, along with setting up the idea for Dream Drop Distance. But again, why did this have to tie into anything else other than Kingdom Hearts 3? If they had made this a standalone story that didn't connect to any other game than that one, this could have been really well written and a great standalone story that was wholly unique on its own. But as it stands, the game feels a little disjointed in how it's physically structured. On the whole, Birth by Sleep has an emotional but still kind of silly story that is one of the biggest puzzle pieces to understand the story of later games. But at the same time, it has the main protagonist of the series be dressed like a black licorice Deadpool, because why the hell not? I will say this, the idea of different playstyles is embraced by this game because of how the story is structured. It was really akin to the sword, shield, and rod in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. I saved these for this moment because it makes more sense to talk about it here. In those 2 titles, you were given the option to pick one of these items to determine your ability and stat layout for Sora, but here, each character took one of those concepts for themselves and you adapted to them, which to me is interesting seeing as I'm a tank and magic user in a lot of games, so having to be a quick melee character was a bit of a new spin for me, and the intrigue for me doesn't stop there since Ven is my favorite character in the game. He's definitely the fastest and has the most sulking moments, but he's still the most optimistic of the group, and that makes me love him. However, for all the things the game does right, the developers didn't quite pull it off as well as they could have. You have a tank, a book, and a bullet to work from. Terra is slow and bulky, Aqua is primarily a magic book with a healthy dose of monotone, and Ven is quick and light on his feet. And I love this, but I wish they were more varied, because aside from the agility moves and shock locks you get from the game, you don't really have a lot of variety in terms of playstyle. Every character plays the same aside from what I just said, that being their overall movement, and that doesn't really make me want to play through each character when they all have the same movesets at their core, but I chalk that up to the command deck being kinda shit to work with sometimes. For those of you who haven't played this game in the series, the command deck was this game's, well, everything. The command deck starts at 3 and slowly gets to 8 throughout the playtime of the game. Items and magic were also tied to this deck, as well as your special abilities. In fact, the only 3 things that fall into the basic movement category that aren't in this thing are your dodge ability, jump, and 3-hit combo. You're bound by this damned thing for the whole game, and it's like being shown a list of awesome things you can do and then telling you to pick at most 8. But here's the rub. Whereas in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 you could have all your abilities and items and magic in different places, now you have to balance the deck in order to make sure that you can heal, defend, and attack, which is not the best thing in the world because, as I said earlier, the moves you get outside of movement abilities are all identical to one another. It also doesn't help that the best abilities in the game are the ones that have invincibility frames or do AoE damage, like the Surges, Fission Viraga, and Thundershot. But I digress. The stories are slightly different enough, and putting the pieces together from each one is pretty interesting, but at the same time, annoying as all hell to play the same game 3 times in such quick succession to only have the graffiti on the wall change color. I think it would have been better if the game was more like Dream Drop Distance, in where you play through one continuous story that ends with the 3 the Keyblade Lake Graveyard. The game could have had it so that you bounce from character to character depending on what the story needs to happen. Say you're in Enchanted Dominion, you play as Terra first, then when his story is done with, you go go to Ven, then Aqua. Following that, you would go to Castle of Dreams and have Ven be the start, then Terra, then Aqua, and so on and so forth. Then that world would be over and done with, rather than doing it bit by bit, and having the story feel like it's trying to be a soap opera with dragging out the reveals and all the damn moping. Don't get me wrong, I like this game way more than some others in the series, but man is it hard to get into sometimes. Despite all my bitching and moaning, and depending on who you ask, Birth by Sleep is either the best game in the series, or is one step behind Kingdom Hearts 2, and given what I just went through, I would have to agree with the latter. That title card might be a tad misleading. What I'm referring to is a scene at the end of Sora's story in the game, but I'll get to that in a bit. Dream Drop Distance takes place in the Sleeping Realm, where you play as both Sora and Riku, switching between them to experience the same worlds from different perspectives. Where have we heard this before? In order to wake the 7 sleeping keyholes for their Mark of Mastery exam. That's the Cliff Notes version so as to have everyone up to speed. Moving on to the actual structure, this game has time travel elements in the form of its villains, and most people hate time travel stories, but I kinda like it. And in actuality, I like the reason for it in this game, that being that Xehanort needs 13 new bodies for the next Keyblade War to happen. What bothers me about this game's story is that it seems like the developers wanted to tell 3 different stories at the same time. On one end, you have Sora's exam, in where he is waking the keyholes and making friends with anything with a pulse, and fails after all that work because of bullshit. Again, I covered this point in another video. On the other side, we have Riku's exam, and he's blasting Linkin Park so loud that I think even Reaper is like, geez man, lighten up. And somewhere in the middle of all that, they squeezed in how Maleficent and Pete got out of the datascape and recoded. And even then, that's like 10 minutes of cutscenes spread out over half the game's story. So I don't get what the point was. I mean, you have the implicit reason that we need to know how they got out before Kingdom Hearts 3 happens, but at the same time, who cares? I doubt anyone really played Recoded, and I know this because they had to turn the game into a movie like 358 over 2 days. The big problem here is that while the game is one playthrough long, like how I thought Birth by Sleep should have been, it doesn't connect onto itself. Unlike Birth by Sleep, though the stories are set up to never connect until the very end. I think the Birth by Sleep route would have been a better way to keep this a little less confusing. I know it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but listen and learn. Birth by Sleep had 3 different stories that directly tied into one another constantly, and are happening in the same universe. In Castle of Dreams, at the end of Terra's story, you run into Aqua, and in Aqua's story, this is the same cutscene near the start of her chunk in the world. Like, literally the same cutscene. However, in Dream Drop Distance, Sora and Riku don't ever cross in the game until the end. How much punchier would Sora's ending be if we played it, and then the credits roll, and you're left in the dark about what happens next until you beat Riku's ending? Where have we seen this before? Again, if these 2 games switched their storytelling methods around, then I feel their respective story qualities would have shot up immensely, especially near endgame. Speaking of near the end, the scene I said that was at the end of Sora's story that frustrated me was this bit. This scene made me do so many double takes that I can't even begin to explain my confusion. I'm aware that Sora is kinda losing his mind here, but the whole thing plays out as if he took all the drugs, and I was just so lost. I do have to say this with all honesty, Dream Drop Distance has a story that is pretty mediocre, but the combat is fun, although broken as hell. Flow motion is the new shiny mechanic, but other than something like Shock Dive or a wall jump, it isn't all that necessary. Although if you want to speed through areas, the wall jump can be helpful, considering you can jump over and past most if not all enemies. I will say that the Dream Eaters are pretty fun. I don't know about anyone else, but I adore Pokemon and me. It's a fun side game that has some benefits to the overall combat design, which is what I see Dream Eaters as. So I had time to soften to the idea of Dream Eaters before I even encountered one. So to me, the idea of having the same thing only now gives me passive and active abilities is a lot better than simply not having them be useful at all. One thing I will get upset at Dream Drop Distance for is the secret ending. I didn't mention those until now, and that's because they apply better here. In almost every game in the series, there would be a secret, high-rendered, almost Kingdom Hearts 3-esque looking cutscenes that would usually highlight a fight from a later game in the series. Kingdom Hearts 1 had the fight between Roxas and Riku in 358 Days. Kingdom Hearts 2 had essentially what is all 3 fights from Birth by Sleep, and that game gave you the setup to Recoded. All of these were randomly triggered and had a higher chance of activating the higher your difficulty difficulty was. Dream Drop Distance gave you this, a small, nothing scene that is in the same engine as the rest of the game, and it can be unlocked at any difficulty level if you simply flew into the letters that spelled out secret message unlock in the end credits. No challenge or really even a reason to replay the game on higher difficulties, unlike in most other cases. It's such a nothing scene that I honestly think that Nomura realized like a day before the game shipped out that they hadn't made a post-credit scene, so they just pulled the last scene of the game out and stuck a mini-game in to make everyone happy. And the reason why this pisses me off so much is because the opening title for the game is one of those highly rendered scenes that I was talking about. So they had the budget and capability for it, so why didn't they do it? The only bigger outlier of this concept is Rechain of Memories, which had an entire second game waiting for you to play, the first being Sora's and the second being Riku's. Okay, it wasn't perfect, but at least it had something to differentiate itself from the rest of the pack. Dream Drop Distance didn't do any of that. It simply just wasted your time watching the credits to potentially see a 2-minute scene of 5 characters talking about the buildup of what the scene is about. What's worse about the minigame is that if you miss a single, and I do mean a single one, of those letters, then in order to see that scene in-game, you have to replay the final boss gauntlet again just to try and take another shot at it. My advice for new players is, if you're gonna play this game, just brace yourself. Again, I'm just gonna smush these two together because they're so similar, it'd be like trying to find the difference in the Red Dead games. Let's start with Back Cover, seeing as it's considerably shorter. Back Cover is the movie that was slapped onto a disc with 0.2 Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance HD. It's structured just like Recoded and 358's movies. Cutscene salad hat trick, ladies and gents. But the thing is, it's not a game turned into a movie. It was conceived, written, and animated to be a movie. Just, you know, in the Unreal Engine. Gotta get your money's worth out of that thing, don't you, Square? And it's just a lore dump for people who haven't played Union Cross, a free-to-play mobile game that I simply don't have time to play, which I have tried to do several times. But to just break down the basics of it, Union Cross is the story of what happens before, during, and after the Great Keyblade War talked about in Birth by Sleep. And Back Cover is the events that directly tie into the Keyblade War happening in the first place. Back Cover has the foretellers, the leaders of each group you can choose from in Union Cross, being told a war is going to happen by their leader, the Master of Masters, while also being given different jobs or roles to do in order to prevent the war from happening, or so they think. Along with that, there's a book of prophecies that tells all, and 4 out of the 5 books had the last page torn out that they all deem the lost page, that details one of them becoming a traitor to the other 4. The only catch is, the Master of Masters ordered one of them to hold on to the lost page and not tell anyone so that everything else in the book would come to fruition. So the whole movie plays out like an episode of a high school drama. People lying, backstabbing, and overall just not thinking before they act. I'm aware this sounds more like a review than anything else at this point, but the story structure and the visiting of other worlds doesn't happen here, so I just have to talk about what I've been given, which isn't a whole lot. See, where Coded and Days had about 3 hours of cutscenes to work with, and even had boss fights turned into full scenes, this quote-unquote movie is 45 minutes long, so there really isn't much to go on about. It just appears to be the bare basics you need to know from Union Cross to get into Kingdom Hearts 3 comfortably. Not too fun to watch, aside from the Master of Masters for his wit, but it's definitely necessary. 0.2 Birth by Sleep is another creature altogether. It's minimal story-wise, with very little in the way of story flow, and is, at its core, a tech demo for Kingdom Hearts 3. It has the new magic system, the same graphics, the same engine, and overall the same gameplay for the most part of what we'll see in the game. The game's story is honestly so short I could sum it up in one sentence. Aqua, one of the protagonists of Birth by Sleep, is trying to get out of the realm of darkness and runs into Mickey Mouse, the character who is telling this story for some odd reason. That's the whole plot. You just go through the worlds of Birth by Sleep, but in the realm of darkness. And Aqua talks to herself. It's a strange way to do this, and I'm glad Aqua's okay, but here's a big question. Other than the demo thing I said, why does this game exist? Aside from learning Mickey and Riku are going to save Aqua, what did this add to the story? Yes, we do learn that Sora is going to Olympus Coliseum to see Hercules, and Riku and Mickey are going to save Aqua, but we could have had Kingdom Hearts 3 start that way. Come to think of it, I'm like 90% sure the game will, because it has to account for the fact not everyone has played 0.2. The strange thing is that this game spans the 10 years between the end of Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts 1's ending in about an hour and a half of gameplay. You tinker around and do some puzzles in the world to get farther along in despair and loneliness. Why the worlds are giving you tests, I don't know, but it's fine. In all honesty though, aside from the ending I just mentioned, this doesn't really need to be a thing. I mean, there are objectives that carry over from New Game Plus, but unless you want to deck Aqua out in Neon till she looks like the most precious rave cat ever, there really isn't a reason to strive for these objectives. It's still fun to get them and play the game in general, along with, as I said before, it's a pretty smart move to send out a game with the same engine and mechanics that Kingdom Hearts 3 will have, but story-wise, there really isn't a need for it to be here. We don't need to know why Mickey's in the Realm of Darkness, or how he got the Dark Keyblade. We don't need to know that Aqua was fucking around with a clock, some mirrors, and a mob of Heartless Worm. Just give us the main course already, we didn't order the appetizer. The game, story, and overall design are serviceable, but just a tad clunky. And just like that, not only in theme, but in time itself, we have come full circle. Thankfully, Kingdom Hearts 3 looks to be going back to the system set up in Kingdom Hearts 2. Simple combat with a lot of abilities, and a straightforward story that leads you to not only visit Disney World, but actively have the story need you to stay and fix the problems brought by Xehanort. With the announcement of the world lineup, the game looks to be tackling new places and wanting to truly get a sense of more worlds than we've ever gotten in the past. And when it comes to the past games, I decided to cover all of them rather than cherry picking through them because I felt it was important to give a reason to why certain games in the series should be looked into more so than others, or simply skipped entirely. As this video comes to a close, I wanted to give my thoughts on what is the legacy of Kingdom Hearts' story. Innovation has to be it. No other series has ever gotten away with changing and adding and completely retconning entire games and being beloved by so many people. Kingdom Hearts has always been as creative as the Disney worlds it showcases, and is just a marvel in how to make a good series. By focusing on a story that engaged people to an absurd degree and changing up the gameplay with each new installment, it proves that minor tweaks can be more effective than a complete overhaul. One last thing I wanted to touch on about Kingdom Hearts 3 in general was that Monsters Inc. trailer we got back at D23 2018. And I want to take a look at this one scene where Sora is summoning Ariel. I wanted to take a look at this 2 seconds of footage because from the moment I watched it at 9 in the morning, groggy, and just kinda out of it, I was filled with a sense of wonder. Now, to clarify, I didn't feel wonderful, that being extremely happy or excited, which I was, but more in a sense that I felt mystified and, well, like a little kid. I felt like magic was in the air and that things were more vibrant, and that's from a 2-second summon animation in a 5-minute trailer, and I think that's due to one element this game is looking to have in abundance. No matter what I look at or from what angle, the simple things hold my attention more than the big spectacles. Things like Toy Sora's design have stayed in my head more than any of the abilities that the Keyblades can do. Like Drill Punch and Hyper Hammer were cool, but those are just add-ons. Yes, the gameplay looks amazing, but Sora's designs have just held my attention and my thoughts more. Also, Sora's monster form is just plain adorable. I mean, come on. Look at that fanged cutie. The same is true about the Heartless and the other outfits we've seen. If you've seen my reaction to the Frozen trailer, you'll remember that one of the things I got the most excited about were visually impressive or simply cosmetic, like Punzel's hair braid or that Frozen Keyblade turning into ice skates. I was more impressed by the deer, stag, moose design than by Elsa killing it, or really anything else like that. And the reason for that is because I like it when Kingdom Hearts takes its premise and overall visual amazement and embraces it. And the fact this simple animal enemy has stuck out to me shows me, if nothing else, that this game will be the most visually creative out of the series. Not to mention, the worlds look massive. Like holy fuckballs, wow, these worlds are gonna be at least a 3 to 4 hour experience each. And I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. Something I realized a while back was that the series has aged with its audience very well. When the series began, it was a life and death situation. The literal universe was in our hands, and as the games go, things got tense, then we hit puberty and got mad, then we chilled out, then we had our emo phase. Following that, our older friends told us about their emo phase, then we got really into computers, then we fell asleep for a long time. It feels like growing up in a way. Almost like as Sora has grown, the games reflected his personality. And from what I've seen about Kingdom Hearts 3, it looks like it's going to be a fun adventure about Sora and his new friends and his old ones doing whatever they want in Disney worlds. Yes, the organization members are still messing with him, but when they're not around, he looks like he's having fun. And really, that's all I want from the game. Fun. Before I go, I want to say this whole video is meant to be a sort of side video to one Lily Orchard did way back in December of 2016. She primarily focused on the gameplay and only brought up the story when it was necessary, and without that video, I would not be sitting here making this one today. So I thought I'd take the opposite approach and talk mainly about the story and only bring up the gameplay as I see fit, if at all. Not the course of events that take place over each game, but more so how the series has changed in terms of its structure and tapestry weaving to varying effects. I want to thank you for watching this. I've been working on this for quite a while, and I thought it was necessary to talk about the ideas and concepts of a series in a way that someone I enjoy immensely hadn't, not only to cover what I feel is just as important to a game as its combat, but to also take a look at how we got to Kingdom Hearts 3, while also being positive about a game series that has shaped players for nearly 2 decades, as well as bitch-smacking me in the feels because Sora is the driving force of the universe that made me realize I'm more of a softie than I already was. If you haven't watched Lily's video, I suggest you go do so, to not only get a second opinion, but to also see why it inspired me. The link will be in the description below and the iCard. Kingdom Hearts is one of those series that grabbed me by my imagination and wouldn't let go, and I truly wanted to introduce the series to people who either haven't heard of it or simply stayed away from it due to the whole total confusion of this game series, which I completely understand someone doing that if you only have an outsider's POV. The first time I saw this scene, I was admittedly screaming that Satan was real, but it's worth it. However, despite that hurdle, I hope I've succeeded in that goal. My name is Chris, and I hope you all let your hearts be your guiding keys.